Hello, Rarely Friends! Today I have a very special video for you. As I've said a million times before, I believe that we as writers and storytellers should always be on the lookout to learn from every sort of medium around us, whether it is movies and other books and video games. Talking about video games, I recently finished my playthrough through Season 1 and 2 of The Walking Dead by Telltale Games, which is a storytelling game set in the Walking Dead universe. If you didn't see my playthrough, I actually uploaded it on YouTube, and there's 2 full playlists of it. You can find the links to it in the description below. With that being said, that game focuses, of course, heavily on story and character choices and the consequences of those choices. So I thought, you know what, now that I finished those stories and we did our whole analysis of that, I thought, you know what, let's sit down and actually talk about the writing lessons and the writing tips that we can learn from The Walking Dead by Telltale Games. As I've mentioned in one of my editorials recently, and by editorials I mean the little videos that I have at the end of every video where I just basically talk about whatever's on my mind, I recently talked about the idea of stealing from other writers, and I think that is not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's ineffective when somebody just simply takes an element of a popular book or series or games or movies and plops them on their story hoping that will make them as successful as that. I don't think that works. I don't think that's effective. I think what works best is to look at the things that we enjoy and the parts of the medium that we want to be like and analyze them and, seek the theory behind them. Because the Telltale Games, The Walking Dead by Telltale Games is not a good story because it's got zombies in it or because you have to look after a little girl. It's effective because it has a lot of really good storytelling technique and theory behind it. What were those great storytelling lessons that we should all learn from? Well, let's dive right in. So looking back on my experience with The Walking Dead by Telltale Games, I think there are 2 lessons that all of us as writers and storytellers can learn from. The first is the most obvious, and it is the entire basis of the game. Choices and consequences. Throughout the entirety of The Walking Dead, you actually make choices, and that is how the game is tailored to the way you play. Depending on how you behave and the people you side with, it affects the story later on, the people you will be with, your allies, your enemies, and things like that. So there's a real weight to the way your character behaves and to the choices you make. And at times, being silent can be worse than actually picking a side. One of the things that throws me out of a story is when sometimes a character makes choices and there appears to be little to no consequence to those choices. They can make a mistake and everybody quickly forgives them, or they can do something selfish and everybody immediately understands them and nobody's angry at them for being selfish. In The Walking Dead, things are different though, because life and death is actually weighed on your choices. People will die and live based on what you decide to do. And that, of course, does not give an element of realism to the way you go about making choices, but also gives things weight, because there will always be a consequence to the choices you make. Of course, I am not saying that every choice your characters make need to have a binary death or life outcome. What I am saying though is that in real life, it doesn't take a lot to get people on your bad side. After all, it's just as simple as making a careless statement, saying something that you don't mean and hurting someone's feelings, and that immediately and directly changing how they feel about you. Again, it's not about choices being about life or death, it's about the concept of having weight and risks, and there being a consequence to the things characters do. After all, every choice we make affects the world around us, and thus it should affect the world in your story. Consider, for instance, an argument arises between the main characters of your story, and the main character decides to go through the mountain pass as opposed to the easier path because it's faster. One of the companions could be easily against this idea, to the extent that this creates a divide on the team because, they feel their opinion is not being heard, and opposed to just, agreeing with what the main character says because the main character is always right, they actually stand for what they believe in and create this divide within the group, which in turn creates more drama and more story engagement. Never forget that just because your character happens to be the main character of the story, that does not protect them from the consequences of their choices, even those they did not intend. Because as I've said, it does not take a lot to get somebody to not like you. It can be as simple as making a careless statement or doing something without thinking, and then next thing you know, there's a great divide between people who used to be friends. Again, choices and consequences that matter. With that being said, what is the other lesson that I think we can all take from The Walking Dead by Telltale Games? When I've been talking about this and discussing this, people ask me, Max, what do you think is the one thing that made the characters in The Walking Dead feel more human, or feel human-like? And I think the answer to that is actually very simple. The characters in The Walking Dead, regardless of where they came from or when were they introduced in the story, they all have the power to change the story. One of the things that gets me about fiction sometimes is the idea that characters come in tiers. There's like first tier characters, second tier characters, and third tier characters. And the people on the second and third tier are not allowed to modify the story. They're there for delivering information like NPCs in a video game, and the only people who get to actually actively change the story are the people in the first tier. And this gets me because it makes the world feel a little artificial. Because, I mean, after all, in the real world, everyone can change you, and every little person out there has the potential of actually changing your life. Because as the old saying goes, everyone is the main character of their own story. And when you look at The Walking Dead, and the characters who in any other story would have been secondary characters, in The Walking Dead are able to actually directly change the plot and make their own selfish choices because in their mind they're doing what's best for them. Characters like Ben and Kenny and Larry and Lily and Luke, a lot of people with L's now that I think about it, but all these characters who they could be the main characters of their own books if, somebody wanted to write that, because they come in wanting stuff, and they are selfish, and they're able to affect the story. What made these characters so real for me, especially characters like Kenny, is because they could go against the main character's wishes and do whatever they wanted to do because they thought that was the right way to go about doing things. Kenny is the main culprit of this, and that made him so much more human. Of course, that doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with the character, but I think that having an emotional reaction, whether it is agreeing with somebody or not agreeing with them, is better than having no emotional reaction. And the thing that made him and many other characters in The Walking Dead so effective is that everyone had their own agenda. Everyone had something they wanted to achieve and their own way to go about achieving this, even if it meant backstabbing the main character, or rather the main character from our point of view, because in the stories that we play through The Walking Dead, we were merely just one person, and we never got that barrier of safety that you get in other stories, particularly in fiction, where you get the feeling that the main character is kind of protected and safeguarded against, people wronging them. And while I do actually agree that, sometimes you may not want every single character in your story to directly affect the story and the plot, I do think that we forget about the little things, because sometimes the characters we stumble upon in real life as well can change us in little small ways, like the random stranger who gives you a compliment, or the lonely girl sitting in the bus who's silently weeping. I think that sometimes we forget that every character, every real person we see out in the background of our lives have dreams of their own, and goals of their own, and things that they want to achieve, and alongside all of these things, they also have the power to change the world. You may be thinking to yourself, wow, all these tips are very character focused, and I think that's because the biggest strength of the Walking Dead game by Telltale Games is character. It is absolutely character, because, it could be on space, it could be on a dark fantasy setting, it would not matter because it would still be about the characters. Again, I think the biggest lessons we can learn from The Walking Dead by Telltale Games deal with character. Now, allow me to summarize to you what I think are the two biggest lessons we can learn from The Walking Dead by Telltale Games. The first is to focus on character choices, and most importantly, the consequences of their actions. The second, and my most favorite one, to be entirely honest, is to remember that every character in your story has their own agenda, their own goals, and their own ability to make choices which carry consequences. I hope that helps, and I hope that if anything, I've given you the inspiration to go out and examine other things in culture, other movies, other books, other games that you enjoy for their story or their character building or their world building, and analyze the way they created such things, and in turn, seek to learn the lessons, not take the elements that they did well, but rather the theory behind those elements, adapting it to whatever you're working on, and seeking to create something better. Again, I do hope this helps. I am planning on doing more episodes like this, particularly with things that I've been meaning to talk about for ages. I want to do an episode on the Chronicles of Amber, particularly on the way it does world building, and I want to do an episode on Durarara because that anime nails multiple points of view. So, there's a couple of things that I want to be talking about in the future. If you have recommendations or ideas for things that you would like me to look at and analyze, please leave them in the comments below, along with any other comments or writing questions that you would like me to answer. With all of those things said, though, like, subscribe, do all of the socially related things, and if you would like even more writing advice, you can head over to my official writing blog over at maxkieran.tumblr.com. Thank you for watching, thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me, and I'll be seeing you soon! Mwah! And hello there, welcome back to Max's Editorials, aka the things that happen at the end of the video. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I've been really excited to have this new series, like writing lessons from X or Y. And I wanted to begin with The Walking Dead because it's really recent on our memory, and I also really wanted to talk about it because we just finished it, and it was such an exciting journey playing those games. And I want to dedicate this editorial to telling you that if you haven't already and you've been meaning to, you should totally go pick up the games. Pick up all of the games by Telltale Games. They're actually really awesome. It's funny because I knew them before they did the storytelling stuff. I knew them back when they were doing the Back to the Future point-and-click adventure game and the Sam & Max games, which were still really funny and cute. So they have a nice backlog and stuff. And recently they've been focusing a lot more on storytelling, which of course I love and I enjoy, and you should totally support people like that. But yeah, I want to dedicate this editorial to Telltale Games and the amazing product that they created. It was an amazing blast to play it. The first season by myself and the second season with Kitty. It was awesome, and if you want to explore multiple endings, because that's like the biggest strength out of those games is the fact that, you can play your own way. You don't have to take the choices I took. So if you want to go learn more about that, there are links to all of those things in the description below. With all of those things said, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon, nerds!